Yeah, so I hope you can see my screen. The first story for today is Lies, Lies. One day, a priest came into the court of King Sri Krishna Deva Rayalu at Vijayanagar. After greeting the king and all the members of court that were present there, he said, "My lord, I hear that the greatest mind of Vijayanagar are seated here. In which case, I want to ask a question and I want a satisfactory answer from one of your ministers. Will you permit me to ask?" King Ralu obviously could not back away from this proposal. He turned to the priest and said, "You may proceed. Rajguru Thatacharya here will be happy to answer your question." The man then turned to the Rajguru and said, "My lord, can you prove me that all that is around us is actually Maya?" Thatacharya smiled at the man and replied, "Of course, my friend. After all, this is written in the Shastras, isn't not?" The man was not convinced. He said, "That is not a suitable answer, my lord. This is mainly theoretical. I wanted a more practical answer to my question." Thatacharya was quick to reply again. He said, "Well, my friend, let me elaborate. See, when we come to this world, we come with nothing. Then, when we die, we leave without any of our worldly possessions. Therefore, all that we acquire in this life is false. You could say all that is Maya." The priest was still not happy with what Thatacharya has to say. He turned to King Rayalu and said, "My lord, I am sure that you will agree with me that Rajguru is giving us an answer which is not practical. Can anyone else here satisfy me?" On hearing the priest's demand, the king turned to Tenali Rama. On having the king's approval, Rama immediately got up and said, "To answer your question, my friend, I first need to ask you a question. Where would you say are the Himalayas?" The man quickly replied, "Why, they are to the north." Tenali then said, "Right. And where would a person in China say the Himalayas are?" The man replied, "To the south." "Correct. Then both answers will be correct. Or, as I can also say, both answers are wrong. And not just in that case, in this case, even in matters like day and night, both answers may be correct or wrong. So nothing is true, everything is a lie. Or, answering your question, everything is Maya." The priest had to concede that Tenali Rama had answered his question with most practical examples. King Rayalu smiled at Tenali as he had once again saved the honor of Vijayanagar. So did you like that story? I liked it. So we come to know so much when we read stories, and not only stories for us, for adults, stories for kids are very good to learn something new. If you agree with me, please comment below. So let's start our next story, which is honesty. Rajguru Thatacharya once suggested to King Sri Krishna Deva Rayalu that as compared to rich people, the poor were more dishonest. He added that this was definitely because the poor lied more out of necessity. Tenali Rama was quick to object to the Rajguru's point. To settle the argument, he said the king for 2 bags of gold and some time. As the king handed him the bags, he went to a place which he knew was frequented by a rich merchant and a poor man every day. He left the 2 bags there and went back to the palace. As was expected, the merchant found 1 bag while walking through that path in the morning. He took the bag and, considering it to be a boon from goddess Lakshmi, he went home and kept the money. Within the course of the day, the poor man also found the other bag. But instead of taking it away with him, he went straight to the royal treasury and handed the bag over to the treasury officials. Next day, as the court assembled, Tenali Rama walked up to the king and declared that only 1 bag has been returned, and contrary to what Rajguru had said, it was the poor man who had returned the bag. The king immediately summoned both the merchant and the poor man. When questioned, the merchant replied, "Sir, I considered the money to be a boon from goddess Lakshmi and therefore took it with me. However, I invested the money and lost it all. I am ruined. The king then turned to the poor man and asked him why he returned the bag, especially since he could have used it himself. The poor man replied, Your Majesty, the bag did not belong to me. I thought that perhaps the bag belonged to someone who needed the money more than me. Therefore, I came to the treasury and returned it. The king smiled at Tenali Rama, who had once again proved his point satisfactorily. Rajguru Thatacharya was, however, nowhere to be seen. So we can see that this Tenali Rama, he don't try to prove himself by telling something. He always showed that what is right, what is wrong. So this approach is very good when you want to prove your point. So the next story is false. So I think this would be the last story for today. So one day in the court of King Sri Krishna Deva Rayalu of Vijayanagar, Rajguru Thatacharya got into a heated argument with one of the courtiers. The courtier had claimed that while people criticize others easily, they never point out to the faults in their own self. Rajguru obviously disagreed with this. As the argument progressed, a painter arrived at the court. He said that as a tribute to King Rayalu, he had drawn the portrait of a woman. The king was extremely impressed by the painting, but as he passed it on to his courtiers, they all started pointing out some or the other flaws. No one was completely satisfied with it. Tenali Rama then came up to the king and said, My lord, I have an idea. Why don't you having that picture in the center of the city? We'll post a banner there which will instruct people to mark the portion in the painting which they think is not correct. The king agreed to Rama's proposition. Next evening, when the picture came back to the palace after the display in the city, the king was horrified to see that there were so many marks on it that the actual picture had disappeared. On seeing king's face, Rama went up to him and said, Now, sir, tomorrow let us put this picture up at the same place and tell people to rectify whatever they think wrong in it. There will, of course, be a reward for everyone who does that. Again, when the picture came back in the evening, the king was horrified to see that though a reward was offered, no one had even been bothered to touch the painting. Rama then returned to the king and said, People like to point out flaws, but they never bother to correct them, my lord. The courtier who was arguing with Thatacharya the day before was trying hard not to break into peals of laughter. The king simply rewarded Tenali Rama for proving his point, and the painter was handsomely rewarded too. So with this, let me close it. So with this, I am ending today's live. Did you like the live? Please comment. If you are watching this, please watch all the stories, because by watching these, you will get a good learning which you can implement in your life, and you can tell to your kids whenever they will need some of your advice. You can tell your advice through stories. You can tell these stories fit into your speech or anywhere you are telling something, because storytelling is a very good way to communicate. So with this,